In the turbulent geopolitical landscape of the 21st century, one of the most complex and contentious international relationships is the alliance between the United States and Israel. From stalemated peace talks in the Middle East to divisive United Nations resolutions, Washington's unwavering support for Jerusalem is consistently at the heart of heated discussions. This relationship not only captures the attention of political analysts and historians but is also a hot topic in religious communities, particularly among evangelical Christians in the U.S. This raises a fundamental question: can the U.S.-Israel relationship be fully explained solely through a political, strategic, and economic lens, or are there deeper, theological and prophetic elements subtly shaping it? Typically, when examining the U.S.-Israel relationship, two main perspectives are often put forward to explain it. First is the political strategic view. According to this, the close cooperation between the two nations is seen as being based on shared interests in security, regional stability, and democratic values. Israel is viewed as a strategic outpost for the U.S. in a volatile Middle East, a reliable partner in the fight against terrorism, and a robust democracy in a predominantly authoritarian region. From this perspective, massive military aid, diplomatic support in international forums, and the U.S. recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital are all pragmatic calculations aimed at ensuring U.S. national security and maintaining influence in the region. Analysts often point to the role of powerful lobbying groups, electoral pressure, and economic interests as the primary drivers behind U.S. policy. However, beyond the dry political perspective, another concept, often overlooked or considered unconventional in academic analyses, emerges powerfully: the divine connection. This view argues that the relationship between the U.S. and Israel is far deeper than mere geopolitical calculations. It stems from sacred promises and covenants recorded in the Bible, particularly the Abrahamic covenant. According to those who subscribe to this view, the existence and development of Israel, along with its role in world history, are part of God's grand plan. Therefore, U.S. support for Israel is not just a foreign policy but an act of obedience to divine will, a choice that could bring blessings or curses upon the United States itself. These two perspectives do not necessarily exclude each other, but they often overlap and sometimes conflict in their interpretations of events. Some might see strategic benefits as evidence of God's blessing when the U.S. supports Israel, while others might view religious motivations as a threat to a rational foreign policy. The complexity lies in the fact that seemingly rational political decisions might be made by individuals with deep faith in a divine element, or conversely, religiously motivated decisions might yield politically advantageous outcomes. This essay will delve into the central argument that the relationship between the United States and Israel is not merely a political connection but is deeply rooted in religious beliefs and biblical prophecies. We will argue that the consistent and sometimes politically illogical U.S. support for Israel can be better understood when considering theological factors, particularly derived from the Abrahamic covenant. This argument will be analyzed in detail, showing how ancient prophecies not only foretold the dispersion and return of the people of Israel but also alluded to the destiny of other nations, including the United States, depending on how they treated God's chosen people. We will examine how this belief has influenced and continues to influence critical policy decisions and is even believed to shape the destinies of both nations. To clarify this argument, the essay will be structured into the following main sections. Part 2. The Unbreakable Foundation, the Abrahamic Covenant. This section will delve into explaining the Abrahamic Covenant in the Bible, its unconditional nature, and its three main pillars: the promise of a people, a land, and blessings/curses. Part 3. The Prophetic Tapestry of Israel's History, a Destiny Woven. This section will examine how prophecies concerning Israel's dispersion, desolation, and miraculous return, including the restoration of its land and language, have been astonishingly fulfilled throughout history. Part 4. Israel at the epicenter of end-time prophecy. This section will focus on the role of Israel and Jerusalem as the focal point of end-time prophetic events, including prophecies about Jerusalem as a burdensome stone and the Gog and Magog war. Part 5. America's Fateful Choice. The final section will analyze the role of the United States, from its foundational principles rooted in a biblical worldview to the influence of the evangelical Christian community in shaping its policy toward Israel, through the lens of the blessing and cursing principle. Through exploring these aspects, this essay hopes to provide a more comprehensive and profound understanding of the U.S.-Israel relationship, moving beyond conventional explanations to touch upon a dimension that many believe to be divine and destined. The alliance between the United States and Israel frequently defies conventional analysis, extending far beyond the typical cost-benefit calculations of international relations. While Israel is a relatively small nation in terms of landmass and population, its influence on global debates and policies is disproportionately vast. It sits at the nexus of three major monotheistic religions, is situated in one of the world's most volatile regions, and holds significant strategic importance due to its technological prowess and military capabilities. Consequently, any decision made concerning Israel reverberates across the Middle East, impacts international diplomacy, and even stirs domestic political landscapes in numerous countries, most notably the United States. To view this relationship solely through the narrow lens of pragmatism, shared intelligence, military cooperation, or mutual democratic values, is to miss a profound dimension that many believe shapes its very essence. For many, especially within certain religious and political circles in the United States, the stakes of this relationship transcend mere policy outcomes, they touch upon the very destiny of nations. This concept of national destiny suggests that a country's long-term prosperity, stability, and even survival are intrinsically linked to its actions concerning Israel. It posits that history is not merely a series of random events or human machinations but is guided by a divine hand, and that obedience or disobedience to certain divine principles, particularly those related to Israel, directly impacts a nation's fate. For the United States, a nation founded on principles deeply rooted in biblical thought, this belief is particularly potent. It implies that aligning with Israel is not just a strategic advantage but a moral imperative, and that any deviation from this alignment could invite adverse consequences, leading to decline, instability, or even calamity. Conversely, unwavering support for Israel is seen as a conduit for divine favor, ensuring continued prosperity and strength. This perspective transforms foreign policy from a secular pursuit into a spiritual undertaking, laden with immense implications. This understanding is not new, it echoes an ancient warning that has resonated for millennia. The warning, deeply embedded in the Abrahamic covenant, states in Genesis 12 verse 3, "I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse." This profound declaration, made by God to Abraham, is interpreted by many as a timeless spiritual law governing the interactions between nations and the descendants of Abraham, the Jewish people. Throughout various historical epochs, this warning has been reinterpreted and applied in diverse contexts. From the rise and fall of ancient empires like Babylon and Persia, whose interactions with Israel were chronicled in biblical narratives, to the colonial powers of Europe and their policies towards Jewish communities, the principle has been consistently invoked. During the Spanish Inquisition, the expulsion of Jews was later linked by some theologians to Spain's subsequent decline. Similarly, the British Empire's eventual diminishing global influence has been, by some accounts, attributed to its policies restricting Jewish immigration to Palestine. This continuous historical application underscores the enduring belief in a direct correlation between a nation's treatment of Israel and its own ultimate destiny, thereby lending a spiritual weight to every policy decision. To truly grasp the profound depth of the relationship between the United States and Israel, one must delve into the theological bedrock upon which many believe it rests, the Abrahamic covenant. This foundational covenant, primarily detailed in Genesis chapters 12, 15, and 17, is far more than a historical agreement. It is considered by many to be an eternal spiritual law that governs the destiny of nations, not just Israel. A detailed examination of the Abrahamic covenant reveals its multifaceted nature. In Genesis 12 verses 1 to 3, God initiates the covenant with a call to Abram, later Abraham, to leave his country, his people, and his father's household. This immediate context underscores an act of faith and separation. The divine promises then unfold: I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. This initial declaration introduces key elements: a promise of numerous descendants, personal blessing for Abraham, a great name, and a universal blessing through him. Crucially, it also introduces the reciprocal principle of blessing and cursing based on how others treat Abraham and his descendants. Genesis 15 elaborates on the covenant, particularly addressing Abraham's concern about having no heir. God reiterates the promise of descendants as numerous as the stars. Abraham's belief in this promise is highlighted: Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness, Genesis 15 verse 6. The chapter culminates in a peculiar, yet profoundly significant, covenant-making ceremony. This ritual, known as a covenant by cutting, involved Abraham cutting animals in half and arranging the pieces. In ancient Near Eastern cultures, this ritual symbolized a solemn oath, where the parties walking between the divided pieces implicitly invoked a curse upon themselves if they broke the agreement. The phrase, cutting a covenant, Hebrew, karet beret, literally reflects this practice. Genesis 17 further solidifies the covenant, establishing it as an everlasting covenant, Genesis 17 verses 7 and 13. Here, God reveals himself as El Shaddai, God Almighty, and renames Abram to Abraham, father of many nations. The covenant sign, circumcision, is introduced as a perpetual reminder of this unbreakable bond. The promise of land is also specified more clearly, delineating the geographical boundaries of the territory to be given to Abraham's descendants: the whole land of Canaan, where you are now an alien, I will give as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you, Genesis 17 verse 8. This highlights the land as an integral and perpetual component of the divine promise. Comparing the Abrahamic covenant with other covenants in the Bible reveals its unique, unconditional nature. Biblical theology identifies several key covenants: the Noahic, Genesis 9, Abrahamic, Genesis 12, 15, 17, Mosaic, Exodus 19-24, Davidic, 2 Samuel 7, and New Covenants, Jeremiah 31, Hebrews 8. While many covenants involve conditions or reciprocal obligations, the Abrahamic covenant stands out due to God's sole responsibility for its fulfillment. The Mosaic covenant, established at Mount Sinai, serves as a stark contrast. It was explicitly conditional, contingent upon Israel's obedience to God's laws, Exodus 19 verses 5-6, Now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Blessings and curses under the Mosaic covenant were directly tied to Israel's adherence to the law, as extensively detailed in Deuteronomy 28. If Israel disobeyed, they would face punishment, dispersion, and desolation. This conditional aspect explains Israel's exiles throughout history. In contrast, the Abrahamic covenant is presented as unilateral and unconditional. God's promises to Abraham, a great nation, a blessed name, a specific land, and a universal blessing, do not hinge on Abraham's future performance or that of his descendants. The significance of the covenant by cutting ceremony in Genesis 15 powerfully illustrates this. After Abraham prepares the animals, he falls into a deep sleep. It is not Abraham, but a smoking fire pot and a blazing torch, symbolic representations of God himself, that pass between the divided pieces of the animals. In ancient covenant rituals, both parties would typically walk through the pieces, signifying their shared commitment and the curses they would incur for breach. By having only God, symbolized by the fire pot and torch, pass through, the ceremony unequivocally demonstrates that God alone bears the full responsibility for fulfilling the promise. There are no stipulations for Abraham or his descendants to meet for the covenant to remain valid. Even when Israel disobeyed and was scattered, the covenant remained intact, held in trust by God. This explains why, despite millennia of exile, the Jewish people have always been promised a return to their land. This brings us to the theological view of the Abrahamic covenant as an eternal spiritual law that governs the destiny of nations. This concept extends beyond Israel to include all nations. The core principle, "I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse," Genesis 12 verse 3, is understood not as a suggestion but as an active, universal divine principle. For believers in this principle, history itself becomes a testament to its truth. Nations and empires throughout history are believed to have risen and fallen, or experienced periods of prosperity and adversity, based on their treatment of the Jewish people. This is not merely a historical observation but a theological conviction that God actively intervenes in the affairs of nations according to this specific covenantal framework. Therefore, for those who adhere to this theological perspective, foreign policy decisions concerning Israel are far from neutral geopolitical calculations. They are imbued with profound spiritual significance, carrying the potential for divine blessing or judgment. This viewpoint profoundly influences how certain segments of society, particularly the evangelical Christian community in the United States, perceive their nation's role and responsibility in supporting Israel, believing that their own national destiny is intricately tied to this ancient, unconditional divine promise. The Abrahamic covenant, as established by God with Abraham, rests upon three fundamental and interconnected promises, acting as unshakable pillars that underscore its enduring nature and cosmic significance. These are the promise of a unique people, an everlasting land, and a universal principle of blessing and cursing. 1. The people of Israel. The birth of the nation of Israel is nothing short of miraculous, testament to divine power and faithfulness. It began with Abraham and Sarah, an elderly couple well past their childbearing years, yet through whom God promised to bring forth a great nation, Genesis 12 verse 2, whose descendants would be as numerous as the stars, Genesis 15 verse 5. From this seemingly impossible beginning, a lineage was established through Isaac and Jacob, Israel, leading to the 12 tribes. This defies biological and demographic norms, highlighting the divine intervention at its very inception. Throughout millennia, this nascent people faced an unparalleled series of trials designed to obliterate them. From the oppressive bondage in ancient Egypt, where Pharaoh sought to exterminate male infants, to the Babylonian exile that stripped them of their homeland and temple, the challenges were relentless. The Roman destruction of Jerusalem and the Second Temple in 70 CE initiated a nearly 2,000-year period of global dispersion, the diaspora, marked by continuous persecution, pogroms across Europe and the Middle East, and attempts at forced assimilation. The Holocaust, the systematic genocide of 6 million Jews in the 20th century, stands as the most horrific and stark example of this relentless drive to annihilate the Jewish people. Yet, despite these existential threats, repeated attempts at cultural and religious assimilation, and being a minority in almost every land they inhabited, the Jewish people remarkably preserved their distinct identity, customs, religion, and sense of nationhood. This unparalleled survival against all historical odds, enduring empires and ideologies that have long since vanished, is widely regarded as a profound social and historical miracle. It is why the very existence of Israel and the Jewish people is considered unique, demonstrating a divine preservation that transcends natural explanations. 2. The land of Israel. Intrinsically linked to the promise of a people is the promise of a specific, everlasting land. God repeatedly affirmed to Abraham that his descendants would inherit the land of Canaan as an everlasting possession, Genesis 17 verse 8. The boundaries of this promised land are detailed in various biblical passages, notably Genesis 15 verses 18 to 21 and Numbers 34. 1 to 12, describing a territory stretching from the river of Egypt to the Euphrates, and from the Great Sea, Mediterranean, to the Arabian Desert. This divine grant forms the bedrock of Jewish claims to the land, endowing it with profound theological and historical significance as a holy land and their rightful inheritance. Today, the land of Israel remains one of the most politically contentious aspects of the Abrahamic covenant. Modern geopolitical disputes over its borders, the status of Jerusalem, and the rights of various populations often clash dramatically with the biblical narrative of an exclusive, eternal Jewish possession. For many believers, these contemporary conflicts are not merely territorial squabbles but the unfolding of ancient prophecies, highlighting the land's central role in divine plans. Crucially, the covenant asserts that the land was given as an everlasting possession, regardless of Israel's obedience. Even when the people of Israel were disobedient, leading to their dispersion and the land's desolation, the title deed to the land remained valid and was held in trust by God. Prophecies in the Old Testament explicitly foretold both the desolation of the land as a consequence of Israel's sin and their eventual return to restore it. For instance, Leviticus 26 verses 32 to 33 states, "I will lay waste the land, and your enemies who live there will be appalled. I will scatter you among the nations." Yet, inextricably linked to this judgment are promises of future restoration, such as Deuteronomy 30 verses 3 to 5, which promises that after scattering, the Lord your God will bring you back from captivity. He will gather you again from all the nations. He will bring you to the land that belonged to your ancestors, and you will take possession of it. These prophecies underscore the land's enduring status as an unconditional divine gift, awaiting the appointed time for its full restoration. 3. The principle of blessing and cursing. The third pillar of the Abrahamic covenant extends its reach beyond the specific people and land of Israel, establishing a universal principle that impacts all other nations. "I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." Genesis 12 verse 3. This is not merely a conditional statement but is understood by many as an active, binding, and eternal spiritual law. It implies a direct correlation between how a nation treats Abraham's descendants, the Jewish people, and its own fortunes, prosperity and favor for those who support and protect them, and decline and adversity for those who persecute or oppose them. Throughout history, theologians and historians have often pointed to various empires and nations as case studies illustrating this principle. For example, the Spanish Empire, which reached its zenith of power in the 15th and 16th centuries, embarked on a period of precipitous decline after the 1492 Alhambra Decree, which expelled all Jews from Spain. While complex historical factors contributed to its downfall, many religious commentators view this expulsion as a direct catalyst for the empire's long, irreversible decline, linking it to the principle of Genesis 12 verse 3. Similarly, the British Empire, which at its height controlled a quarter of the world's land and population, was given the mandate over Palestine after World War I. However, its policies became increasingly restrictive towards Jewish immigration, culminating in the 1939 White Paper, which severely limited Jewish entry into Palestine at the very moment they most desperately needed a safe haven from the Holocaust. Following World War II, during which the White Paper was actively enforced, the British Empire rapidly crumbled, losing its vast colonial holdings and global dominance. These historical patterns are frequently cited as powerful evidence that adherence to or defiance of this ancient principle has tangible, often dramatic, consequences for national destinies. If the Abrahamic covenant provides the unyielding blueprint, then the history of the Israeli people, marked by both profound suffering and miraculous resilience, is the tumultuous construction process, with every stage astonishingly foretold in ancient scripture. This ongoing narrative serves as a living testament to the enduring power of divine prophecy. Dispersion and desolation, details of the prophecies. The Bible does not shy away from detailing the severe consequences of Israel's disobedience to God's covenantal commands. Long before these events unfolded, the prophets warned that a failure to adhere to divine law would lead to catastrophic judgment, including forced exile and the desolation of their cherished land. Leviticus 26 lays out a stark choice between blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience. Verses 32 to 33 explicitly state the coming judgment: "I will lay waste the land, and your enemies who live there will be appalled. I will scatter you among the nations and will draw out my sword and pursue you. Your land will be desolate, and your cities will lie in ruins." Similarly, Deuteronomy 28 provides an even more extensive and chilling list of curses for covenant unfaithfulness. Verses 64 to 65 prophetically declare, "Then the Lord will scatter you among all nations, from one end of the earth to the other. There you will worship other gods, gods of wood and stone, which neither you nor your ancestors have known. Among those nations you will find no repose, no resting place for your foot. There the Lord will give you an anxious mind, failing eyes, and a despairing heart. These prophecies describe not merely a temporary setback but a prolonged period of displacement, insecurity, and national demise. The historical context of Israel's dispersion tragically fulfilled these detailed prophecies. The first major wave of exile occurred with the collapse of the northern kingdom of Israel to the Assyrians in 722 BCE, followed by the destruction of the southern kingdom of Judah and the Babylonian exile in 586 BCE. While a portion of the Jewish people returned from Babylon, the most devastating and prolonged dispersion began after the Roman destruction of Jerusalem and the Second Temple in 70 CE. This event marked the end of Jewish sovereignty in their homeland for nearly 2 millennia. Subsequent Roman persecutions, including the brutal suppression of the Bar Kokhba revolt, 132 to 135 CE, further solidified the Jewish diaspora across the known world. For nearly 1,900 years, the land of Israel became what the prophecies foretold, largely desolate and barren. Historical accounts and travelers' observations confirm this state. The renowned American writer Mark Twain, visiting the land in 1867, vividly described it as a desolate and silent expanse in his book The Innocents Abroad. He noted, "Of all the lands there are for dismal scenery, I think Palestine must be the prince. The hills are barren, they are dull of color, they are unpicturesque in shape. The valleys are unsightly deserts fringed with a feeble vegetation that has no charm for the eye." He further remarked on a desolate country whose soil is rich enough, but is given over wholly to weeds. Such first-hand accounts provide compelling historical evidence for the literal fulfillment of the biblical prophecies concerning the land's desolation during the long period of Jewish absence. The miraculous return, analysis of the 1948 event. Following nearly 2 millennia of dispersion and desolation, the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 stands as arguably the most profound and astonishing event in the modern history of the Jewish people, considered by many to be a direct and miraculous fulfillment of ancient biblical prophecies. The historical context leading up to 1948 was a complex tapestry of geopolitical shifts and fervent ideological movements. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw the rise of Zionism, a political movement advocating for the return of the Jewish people to their ancestral homeland and the re-establishment of Jewish sovereignty. Figures like Theodor Herzl, deeply affected by persistent antisemitism in Europe, spearheaded efforts to gain international recognition for this cause. A significant turning point came with the Balfour Declaration in 1917, when the British government, during World War I, expressed its support for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. This declaration, though vaguely worded, provided a crucial political endorsement for Zionist aspirations. Following the war, the League of Nations granted Britain the mandate for Palestine in 1922, tasking it with facilitating the establishment of a Jewish national home while safeguarding the rights of existing non-Jewish communities. This period saw increased Jewish immigration to Palestine, laying some groundwork for future statehood. However, the path to statehood was fraught with immense political and military challenges. Arab opposition to Jewish immigration and the Zionist project grew fierce, leading to violent clashes. The British, caught between conflicting promises and escalating tensions, increasingly restricted Jewish immigration, especially after the 1939 White Paper. This policy proved catastrophic during World War II, effectively trapping millions of Jews in Nazi Europe, sealing their fate in the Holocaust. By the war's end, the British mandate was unsustainable, and Britain turned the Palestine problem over to the newly formed United Nations. In November 1947, the UN General Assembly voted to partition Palestine into separate Arab and Jewish states, with Jerusalem under international administration. While the Jewish leadership accepted the plan, the Arab states vehemently rejected it, vowing to prevent the creation of a Jewish state by force. Despite being vastly outnumbered and outgunned by the surrounding Arab armies, the nascent Jewish community declared independence on May 14, 1948. This declaration immediately triggered the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, also known as Israel's War of Independence, as 5 Arab nations, Egypt, Transjordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, launched a coordinated invasion. Against all military odds, and enduring immense casualties, the newly formed Israel Defense Forces managed to repel the invaders, secure their borders, and even expand beyond the original UN partition lines. This military victory, achieved by a tiny, fledgling nation against formidable regional powers, is often cited by its supporters as nothing short of a modern-day miracle. For many believers, particularly within the evangelical Christian community, the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 is not seen merely as a political event or a triumph of human will. It is regarded as the greatest miracle of the modern era and a direct, unmistakable fulfillment of biblical prophecy. The prophet Isaiah, writing centuries before these events, posed a rhetorical question in Isaiah 66 verse 8, "Who has ever heard of such things? Who has ever seen things like this? Can a country be born in a day or a nation be brought forth in a moment?" The answer, in the eyes of these believers, came definitively on May 14, 1948. A nation, dispersed for nearly 2 millennia, with no sovereign territory, no unified language, Hebrew was largely ceremonial. And no army, suddenly emerged as a sovereign state within a single day. This swift, almost instantaneous birth of a nation is seen as a clear and literal fulfillment of Isaiah's ancient prophecy. This understanding is further amplified by a deeper look into the prophetic vision of the Valley of Dry Bones in Ezekiel 37. In this powerful passage, the prophet Ezekiel is led by God to a valley filled with dry, scattered bones. God commands Ezekiel to prophesy to the bones, and as he does, the bones come together, sinews and flesh cover them, and skin spreads over them, but there is no breath in them. Then, God commands Ezekiel to prophesy to the breath, and breath entered them, they came to life and stood up on their feet, a vast army, Ezekiel 37 verse 10. God then reveals the meaning of this vision, "Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. They say, our bones are dried up and our hope is gone, we are cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says, my people, I am going to open your graves and bring you up from them, I will bring you back to the land of Israel." Ezekiel 37 verses 11 to 12. This vision serves as a perfect metaphor for the national rebirth of a people long thought dead. The dry bones symbolize the utterly hopeless and scattered state of the Jewish people during their long exile, lacking any national life or sovereignty. The reassembly of the bones, covered with tendons and flesh, represents the gradual ingathering of the Jewish people from around the world, their organized efforts, like Zionism, and the establishment of institutions and infrastructure in Palestine leading up to statehood. Finally, the breath of life entering them and forming a vast army signifies the moment of national rebirth, the declaration of statehood and the miraculous ability of the newly formed nation to defend itself and establish a vibrant, sovereign presence in the land. For countless believers, Ezekiel's ancient prophecy found its spectacular, undeniable realization in the improbable, yet profoundly significant, events of 1948. The restoration of land and language, modern achievements. The miraculous return of the Jewish people to their ancestral homeland was paralleled, and indeed made sustainable, by equally miraculous restorations of both the land itself and its ancient language. These modern achievements are viewed by many as further compelling evidence of ongoing biblical prophecy fulfillment. The restoration of the land. For centuries, the land of Israel lay largely desolate, a stark physical reflection of the Jewish people's long exile. Travelers' accounts from past centuries frequently described a barren, neglected landscape, a desolate country, as Mark Twain noted. However, ancient prophecies painted a different future. Isaiah 35 verses 1 to 2 vividly foretold, "The desert and the parched land will be glad, the wilderness will rejoice and blossom like the crocus. It will burst into bloom and rejoice with joyful song. The glory of Lebanon will be given to it, the splendor of Carmel and Sharon. They will see the glory of the Lord, the splendor of our God." This imagery speaks of a radical transformation, where barrenness gives way to lush fertility and vibrant life. Since its re-establishment, Israel has undertaken an extraordinary transformation of its land, directly fulfilling this prophetic vision. Through ingenuity, perseverance, and groundbreaking agricultural innovations, the nation has literally made the desert bloom. One of the most significant achievements is the pioneering of drip irrigation technology, developed by Israeli engineer Simcha Blas in the 1960s. This revolutionary method delivers water directly to the plant roots in precise, controlled quantities, dramatically reducing water waste and enabling cultivation in arid regions previously thought infertile. This technology, now adopted globally, has been crucial to Israel's agricultural success, allowing crops to flourish even in the Negev desert. Beyond drip irrigation, Israel has implemented massive afforestation projects, planting hundreds of millions of trees, transforming rocky hillsides and barren lands into forests and agricultural areas. The Jewish National Fund, JNF, alone has planted over 250 million trees since its inception, significantly increasing the country's green cover and combating desertification. The results are astonishing. Despite over 60% of its land being desert or semi-arid, Israel has become a world leader in agricultural exports. It exports a vast array of fresh produce, including citrus fruits, avocados, flowers, and vegetables, to Europe and beyond. For instance, Israel is a major exporter of fresh produce, with agricultural exports reaching hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Its innovation extends to developing salt-tolerant crops, wastewater recycling for irrigation, reusing about 90% of its wastewater for agriculture, and advanced greenhouse technologies. These concrete developments, fields bursting with crops in what was once parched wilderness, are seen by believers as the most literal and compelling evidence that Isaiah's prophecy of the desert blooming has been fulfilled in modern-day Israel. The restoration of the language. Equally remarkable as the revival of the land is the astonishing restoration of the Hebrew language. For nearly 2,000 years, Hebrew had largely been a dead language in the sense that it was not spoken in daily conversation. Its primary role was confined to religious liturgy, scholarly texts, and biblical study. Jews around the world spoke the languages of their host countries, developing dialects like Yiddish, Germanic, and Ladino, Judeo-Spanish, for everyday use. The idea of resurrecting an ancient, non-spoken language to be the vibrant, modern tongue of a nation was unprecedented in human history. Yet, ancient scriptures subtly hinted at such a linguistic restoration. While not as explicit as prophecies about the land, passages like Zephaniah 3 verse 9 offer glimpses, "For then I will purify the lips of the peoples, that all of them may call on the name of the Lord and serve him with one accord." While this particular verse is often interpreted in a broader spiritual sense of a unified worship, the very concept of purified lips or a renewed capacity for divine communication can be symbolically linked to the reawakening of the sacred tongue. More directly, the very idea of a scattered people returning and forming a nation implies the need for a common, unifying language, and what could be more fitting than the language of their patriarchs and prophets? The lion's share of credit for this linguistic miracle belongs to Eliezer ben Yehuda, 1858–1922. Born in what is now Belarus, Ben Yehuda arrived in Palestine in 1881 driven by the radical conviction that for the Jewish people to become a true nation in their ancient homeland, they needed to speak their ancient language. He embarked on a singular mission, to revive Hebrew as a spoken tongue. He famously made Hebrew the sole language in his own household, even preventing his children from hearing other languages. His son, Itamar ben Avi, was arguably the first native Hebrew speaker in nearly 2 millennia. Ben Yehuda's efforts were tireless. He compiled the first comprehensive modern Hebrew dictionary, coined thousands of new words for modern concepts, from ice cream to bicycle, and tirelessly advocated for its use in schools, newspapers, and daily life. Ben Yehuda's individual efforts sparked a broader movement. Other pioneers joined, forming committees to standardize the language and introduce it into the nascent Jewish educational system in Palestine. Schools became critical hubs for Hebrew revival, teaching generations of children exclusively in the ancient tongue. By the time the State of Israel was established in 1948, Hebrew, though still developing, was firmly established as the primary language of the Jewish population in Palestine. The impact of Hebrew's revival was immense. It provided a powerful, unifying force for a diverse population of immigrants returning from all corners of the globe, speaking dozens of different languages. It became the bedrock of a new, vibrant national culture, fostering a shared identity and a sense of continuity with their ancient past. Beyond mere communication, the language itself carries profound historical and religious resonance, connecting modern Israelis directly to their biblical heritage. This unprecedented linguistic phenomenon, resurrecting a dead language to become the dynamic, everyday tongue of a modern nation, is yet another testament for many to the ongoing fulfillment of prophecy in the land of Israel. Jerusalem as a burdensome stone, geopolitical and prophetic analysis. Following the miraculous re-establishment of its people and land, Jerusalem, Israel's most ancient and sacred city, has become the undisputed focal point of end-time prophecy. Specifically, the prophecy in Zechariah 12 verses 2-3 describes Jerusalem's inescapable role in global events, a prophecy many believe is vividly unfolding in the modern geopolitical landscape. The prophetic language in Zechariah 12 verses 2-3 declares, "Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of reeling to all the peoples around, and when Judah is besieged, Jerusalem will also be besieged. On that day I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all the peoples, all who lift it will be severely injured, and all the nations of the earth will gather against it." The prophetic imagery here is vivid and powerful. The cup of reeling evokes the image of an intoxicating drink that causes dizziness, disorientation, and weakening. This implies that involvement with Jerusalem will lead to instability, chaos, and even ruin for nations. The burdensome stone further emphasizes the difficulty and danger of attempting to move or control Jerusalem. Any such effort will not only be futile but will result in severe injury to those who dare try. Notably, this prophecy refers not just to neighboring nations but to all the nations of the earth, indicating the global scale of the conflict revolving around Jerusalem. In the modern context, Jerusalem has indeed become a geopolitical flashpoint that consistently sparks division and controversy on the international stage. Debates at the United Nations concerning Jerusalem consistently reflect deep polarization. Arab and Muslim nations, along with many developing countries, routinely support resolutions condemning Israel for settlement activities, the status of the Old City, or actions at holy sites. For instance, the UN Security Council has adopted numerous resolutions pertaining to Jerusalem, such as Resolution 478, 1980, condemning Israel's Jerusalem Law declaring Jerusalem its united and eternal capital, or Resolution 2334, 2016, reaffirming Israeli settlements in occupied Palestinian territories, including East Jerusalem, as illegal under international law. These votes often showcase the isolation of Israel and the U.S., with its veto power, as they are frequently the sole dissenters or abstentions against an overwhelming international consensus. Nation stances are clearly divided into blocks, the Arab/Muslim bloc and the non-aligned movement supporting Palestinians, while the U.S. and some Western nations tend to support Israel, albeit sometimes with nuanced differences. A particularly jarring event was the UNESCO resolutions denying Jewish heritage in Jerusalem. In 2016 and 2017, UNESCO adopted controversial resolutions regarding holy sites in Jerusalem, specifically the Temple Mount, or Haram al-Sharif. These resolutions used only Muslim terminology for these sites, omitting Jewish terms, and were criticized for ignoring or downplaying the long-standing historical connection of the Jewish people to Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. For example, the 2016 Occupied Palestine resolution referred to the Temple Mount solely by its Muslim name and criticized Israel for illegal activities. Israel and the U.S. vehemently protested, viewing this as a distortion of history and highly politicized. The impact of these resolutions was to deepen divisions, undermine UNESCO's credibility, and further affirm the perception among Israel and its supporters that the world seeks to delegitimize their connection to their historic capital. All of this contributes to the stalemate of peace negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. The reasons for this deadlock are diverse and complex, encompassing core issues such as the status of Jerusalem, especially East Jerusalem, borders, settlements, refugees, and security. Both sides hold firm to their claims over Jerusalem, viewing it as their undivided capital. Palestinians seek East Jerusalem as the capital of their future state, while Israel declares all of Jerusalem as its eternal and undivided capital. A lack of trust, weak leadership, and recurring violent clashes also undermine any negotiation efforts. Jerusalem, with its profound religious and historical significance to Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike, has become an intractable symbol of the conflict, an issue that seems impossible to reconcile, a burdensome stone that no one can move without severe repercussions. Against this tense backdrop, President Trump's decision on the capital of Jerusalem in December 2017, and the subsequent relocation of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in May 2018, was a landmark geopolitical move. President Trump's motivations were reportedly multifaceted, fulfilling a long-standing U.S. campaign promise, appeasing his strong evangelical Christian base, and demonstrating unwavering support for Israel. The international reaction was polarized. Israel and its supporters hailed the move as a recognition of history and reality. However, much of the international community, including traditional U.S. allies, strongly condemned it, viewing it as a unilateral act that undermined peace prospects, violated international law, and further inflamed tensions. Arab and Muslim nations were particularly incensed, perceiving it as a provocation. From a prophetic perspective, Trump's decision was seen by many believers as an act that increased the weight of the stone of Jerusalem, pushing the city further into a central role in global conflicts, in line with Zechariah's prophecy that all who attempt to lift that stone will be severely injured. Accelerating prophetic events, details of the Gog-Magog War. Following the miraculous return of its people and land, and the increasing geopolitical significance of Jerusalem, biblical prophecies point to an even grander event that will shake the world, the Gog-Magog War, detailed extensively in Ezekiel 38 and 39. Many believers hold this to be an unprecedented conflict, one that will signal God's direct intervention in world affairs and set the stage for ultimate end-time events. In-depth study of Ezekiel 38 to 39, characters, motives, and outcome. The Book of Ezekiel, written during Israel's Babylonian exile, 6th century BC, provides a vivid prophetic vision of a large-scale invasion targeting Israel. The main characters involved include Gog, not an ethnic name but the title of a leader, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, Ezekiel 38 verse 2. Gog's precise identity remains a subject of debate, but he is depicted as a figure of immense power and influence, leading a confederation of nations. Magog, this is the land from which Gog emerges. It is typically associated with a distant region to the north of Israel. A coalition of nations, Gog does not act alone but assembles a vast alliance of peoples from various directions, particularly from Israel's north. The motives for this invasion are clearly described as covetousness and plunder. Ezekiel 38 verses 10 to 12 states, "On that day thoughts will come into your mind, and you will devise an evil plan. You will say, I will go up against a land of unwalled villages, I will go to those who are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls, and having neither bars nor gates. To take plunder and to take booty, to stretch out your hand against the waste places that are again inhabited, and against a people gathered from the nations, who have acquired livestock and goods, who dwell in the midst of the land." This motivation highlights Israel's wealth and their peaceful, secure dwelling after being restored. The outcome of this war is a complete annihilation of Gog's coalition, not by Israel's military might, but by God's direct, supernatural intervention. Ezekiel 38 verses 18 to 23 describes a great earthquake, torrential rains, hailstones, fire, and brimstone raining down upon Gog and his army. Ezekiel 39 verses 2 to 3 states that the invading forces will be so utterly defeated that only a small fraction will survive, their corpses covering the valleys, requiring 7 months to bury them. This outcome is intended to display God's greatness and holiness before all nations. Identifying modern nations, a prophetic outlook. The identification of the ancient nations mentioned in Ezekiel with modern counterparts is an area of intense study in prophetic theology. While various interpretations exist, biblical commentators commonly draw the following connections. Gog and Magog. Many modern scholars believe Magog corresponds to regions of present-day Russia, particularly areas north of the Black and Caspian Seas. Gog is identified as the leader of that nation, or a broader confederation of northern nations. Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, these are regions within or around Magog. Meshech, Muzhki, and Tubal, Tabali, are often linked to present-day Turkey, particularly its northern and central parts. Rosh is sometimes linked with Russia. Turkey country in the world map vector background. Persia, Iran. This is the ancient name for Iran. This is one of the least debated connections among prophetic commentators and current geopolitical events. Iran blue marked in political map of South Asia and Middle East. Simple flat vector map. Kush, typically linked to modern-day Sudan and areas south of Egypt. World map with highlighted South Sudan. Put, identified as present-day Libya, a North African nation. Libya on the world map. Gomer, often associated with ancient tribes located in Turkey, specifically the Cappadocia region, and neighboring areas of Eastern Europe. Turkish city among rocks in Cappadocia region. Togarma, also linked to a part of Turkey and Transcaucasian regions. Thus, the prophesied alliance largely comprises Russia, Iran, Turkey, and several North African/Middle Eastern nations, all situated either to Israel's north or south, and currently making notable geopolitical moves. Analyzing the forming geopolitical alliance, current relationships. Prophetic commentators often point out that current relationships and alliances among the named nations strikingly align with Ezekiel's scenario. Russia and Iran. In recent years, Russia and Iran have solidified their military and political ties, especially through their cooperation in Syria. Both nations seek to expand their influence in the Middle East and counter perceived U.S. presence. Their collaboration in energy, defense, and trade is a testament to this growing alignment. Turkey. Despite being a NATO member, Turkey has grown increasingly independent in its foreign policy, often clashing with the US and its Western allies. Turkey has deepened its relationship with Russia, e.g., purchasing S-400 air defense systems, and demonstrated regional ambitions in the Middle East and North Africa. Sudan and Libya. Both nations have experienced periods of instability and have been focal points for external intervention. Sudan, although recently moving towards better relations with Israel, has historically and prophetically often been grouped with anti-Israel Arab/Muslim nations. Libya has undergone a prolonged civil war with Turkish and other foreign involvement. While these modern alliances are complex and shifting, many prophecy watchers see a convergence of actors that fits Ezekiel's scenario, particularly a northern-southern axis coalescing against Israel. The significance of Israel living safely, various interpretations. Ezekiel 38 verse 11 states that Gog and his alliance will attack a people living safely, without walls, having neither bars nor gates. The phrase, living safely, Hebrew, betach, is a crucial point and has various interpretations in the current context. Relative security. One interpretation is that safely does not mean entirely free from threats, but a relative peace compared to the past. After returning from exile and establishing their state, Israel has achieved a significant degree of stability and prosperity. Though conflicts persist, Israel is no longer in exile or directly dominated by external empires. Financial/economic security. The phrase can also allude to Israel's economic prosperity. Israel is now a high-tech nation, with a robust economy and significant assets, e.g., offshore natural gas reserves. Gog's alliance will be drawn by Israel's livestock and goods, implying wealth as a motive. Complacent security. Some suggest the phrase could describe a state of complacency or overconfidence in its security, perhaps due to future peace treaties or alliances that make Israel feel less threatened. Divinely protected security. For some commentators, living safely might imply a belief that Israel is divinely protected, regardless of external threats, until the Gog invasion occurs. In any interpretation, the prophecy emphasizes that the attack will occur at a time when Israel feels relatively secure and prosperous, making the alliance's motive of plunder clearer and God's intervention even more dramatic. The climax of the war, Armageddon. Following the prophesied Gog-Magog war, the flow of end-time events will lead to the most terrifying climax, Armageddon. Many often misunderstand Armageddon as a conventional world war, a global conflict between military superpowers. However, according to the Bible, particularly the Book of Revelation, Armageddon is not a conflict between nations for world supremacy, but a cosmic, divine confrontation against the Most High. To understand Armageddon more deeply, we need to examine Revelation 16 verse 16. And the demonic spirits gathered the kings together to the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. This verse is set within the context of the 7 bowls of God's wrath, the final judgments poured out on the earth before Christ's return. The events leading to Armageddon begin with demonic spirits, likened to frogs, coming out of the mouths of the dragon, Satan, the beast, Antichrist, and the false prophet. They go out to the kings of the whole world to gather them for the battle on the great day of God Almighty, Revelation 16 verses 13 to 14. This context indicates a supernatural manipulation, where demonic powers assemble world leaders not to fight each other, but against a common enemy, God Himself. The location of this confrontation is a crucial element, Armageddon, a Hebrew word meaning Mount Megiddo, Har Megiddo. Mount Megiddo is not actually a towering mountain but a large mound, Tel, where an ancient city once stood. Nearby is the Valley of Megiddo, also known as the Plain of Esdraelon, a vast and fertile plain in northern Israel. This area holds immense historical and geographical significance. Throughout history, the Valley of Megiddo has been the site of numerous decisive battles. It lies on a major ancient trade and military route, making it a natural battleground for conflicts between competing empires. Famous biblical battles, such as Deborah's victory over the Canaanites, Judges 4-5, and King Josiah's death, 2 Chronicles 35, all took place at Megiddo. Its historical importance as a strategic gateway has cemented its place in the Israeli consciousness and as a symbolic location for decisive clashes. The nature of the confrontation at Armageddon sets it apart entirely from a conventional world war. The Bible makes it clear that the world's armies do not gather at Armageddon to fight each other. Instead, they unite, under demonic manipulation, to oppose Christ when He returns for His second coming in power and glory. Revelation 19 verses 11 to 16 describes Jesus Christ returning on a white horse, with heavenly armies following Him, to defeat the armies of the beast and the kings of the earth. This battle is the ultimate showdown between good and evil, between God's power and human rebellion led by Satan. It is a completely unbalanced conflict, culminating in the utter destruction of the earthly armies by the word of Christ. Israel's central role in end-time events becomes clear in the context of Armageddon. Although the final battle is against Christ, it takes place on the land of Israel, specifically the Valley of Megiddo. Israel, once again, becomes the central stage for the ultimate confrontation between heavenly power and earthly forces. Jesus' return is prophesied to occur on the Mount of Olives, Zechariah 14 verse 4, just outside Jerusalem. This suggests that the Gog-Magog War and Armageddon are not random events but a divinely orchestrated sequence of developments, with Israel and its territory serving as the prophetic clock and the geographical flashpoint of end-time events. For those who believe in this prophecy, Israel's existence, its miraculous rebirth, and its continuous siege are not merely historical or political occurrences, but clear signs that the world is drawing near to the climax of human history, where ancient prophecies will reach their final fulfillment. Nation with a biblical worldview, the influence of Christianity. The unique and enduring relationship between the United States and Israel finds a compelling explanation in America's very foundations, which were deeply steeped in a biblical worldview. Far from being a purely secular enterprise, the early American experiment was profoundly shaped by Christian thought, leading to a natural affinity with the narrative of ancient Israel. A detailed analysis of the role of the Bible in the formation of the United States reveals its pervasive influence on foundational documents and the rhetoric of the Founding Fathers. While the U.S. Constitution establishes a separation of church and state, the moral and philosophical underpinnings of the nation were undeniably rooted in Judeo-Christian principles. Many early American thinkers, even those of the Enlightenment, drew heavily from biblical concepts of law, justice, liberty, and human rights. Figures like John Witherspoon, a signer of the Declaration of Independence and president of Princeton University, explicitly taught from a biblical framework. Early legal codes and educational curricula frequently referenced biblical texts, seeing them as the ultimate source of moral authority and good governance. The very idea of inherent rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, can be traced, for many historians, to the understanding of humanity created in God's image. This biblical grounding fostered a strong identification by the early Puritans with the story of Israel. The Puritan settlers who arrived in the New World saw themselves as a new Israel, embarking on a divine mission. They fled religious persecution in Europe, much as the ancient Israelites escaped bondage in Egypt. Their arduous journey across the Atlantic was often likened to the Israelites' exodus from slavery and their 40-year wilderness wandering. They envisioned America as their promised land, a new Canaan where they could establish a society based on biblical principles, free from the corruption of the Old World. John Winthrop's famous sermon, a model of Christian charity, delivered in 1630, articulated this vision of building a city upon a hill, a beacon of righteousness and a model for the world, directly echoing Matthew 5 verse 14. This metaphor encapsulates the Puritans' belief that their new nation had a special covenantal relationship with God, much like ancient Israel. The influence of the Old Testament on the Founding Fathers was particularly significant. While they were men of the Enlightenment, many were deeply versed in biblical scripture, especially the Old Testament. They drew parallels between the Israelites' struggle for freedom from pharaonic rule and the American colonies' fight for independence from British tyranny. The concept of a covenant, central to the Old Testament, resonated with their understanding of forming a new government based on a social contract among free people. Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, for instance, famously proposed a seal for the United States depicting Moses leading the Israelites across the Red Sea, with Pharaoh's army being swallowed by the waters, symbolizing deliverance from oppression. John Adams, in his later life, reflected extensively on the Hebrew Republic, seeing in it principles of self-governance and moral law that he believed were foundational to a virtuous republic. These figures saw the Old Testament as a historical account of a people blessed by God when they followed his laws and punished when they strayed, offering vital lessons for their fledgling republic. This shared biblical heritage cultivated a profound historical and cultural empathy between the American story and the Israeli story. Both narratives emphasized themes of liberation from oppression, journeying to a promised land, and establishing a society under divine favor. Americans, particularly through their Protestant denominations, grew up hearing biblical accounts of Abraham, Moses, David, and the prophets, internalizing the idea of Israel as God's chosen people with a unique destiny. This created an underlying cultural predisposition to view Israel not merely as another foreign nation but as a fellow inheritor of a sacred narrative. The belief in a providential role for God in their nation's founding mirrored the belief in God's ongoing hand in Israel's history. This deep-seated historical and cultural empathy formed a unique bond, transcending purely strategic calculations and providing a powerful, often unspoken, foundation for America's enduring support for Israel. The principle of blessing and cursing in history, case studies. The enduring belief in the Abrahamic covenant's principle of blessing and cursing, Genesis 12 verse 3, finds compelling, albeit controversial, illustration in the historical trajectories of various nations. For adherents of this view, the rise and fall of empires, or periods of national prosperity and decline, are seen as direct consequences of their treatment of the Jewish people. The case of Spain. The Spanish Empire reached its zenith of power and influence in the 15th and 16th centuries, boasting vast colonial territories and immense wealth from the New World. However, its trajectory took a dramatic turn with the Alhambra Decree of 1492. This royal edict, issued by Catholic monarchs Ferdinand II and Isabella I, mandated the expulsion of all Jews from Spain, unless they converted to Catholicism. While the exact number varies, estimates suggest that between 100,000 and 300,000 Jews, Sephardim, were forced to leave Spain. These were often highly educated, economically productive individuals, merchants, financiers, doctors, and artisans, who had significantly contributed to Spain's intellectual and economic life for centuries. The economic and political impact of this expulsion is a subject of historical debate, but many argue it was a significant factor in Spain's subsequent decline. The departure of such a large and skilled segment of the population led to a brain drain and a substantial loss of capital and economic dynamism. While Spain continued to expand its empire and accumulate wealth from the Americas for a time, it struggled with persistent economic problems, including inflation, excessive military spending, and a failure to develop a robust commercial and industrial base. From a theological perspective, this decline is often presented as a direct fulfillment of the curse outlined in Genesis 12:3, suggesting that Spain's act of cursing the Jewish people initiated a long, irreversible downward spiral for the empire. The case of Great Britain. The British Empire, the largest empire in history, was granted the mandate for Palestine by the League of Nations after World War I. This mandate tasked Britain with facilitating the establishment of a Jewish national home, in line with the Balfour Declaration of 1917. Initially, Britain's policies were somewhat favorable to Zionist aspirations. However, as Arab opposition mounted, British policy began to shift. The turning point came with the 1939 White Paper, which severely restricted Jewish immigration to Palestine to just 75,000 over 5 years, and placed strict limits on Jewish land purchases. This policy was enacted precisely when European Jewry faced the escalating horrors of the Holocaust. The impact on the Jewish people was catastrophic. Despite desperate pleas, British policy effectively sealed the fate of millions of Jews who were trapped in Nazi-occupied Europe and denied refuge in their ancient homeland. After World War II, the British Empire experienced a rapid and dramatic decline, often referred to as the dismantling of the British Empire. Within 2 decades, most of its vast colonial holdings gained independence, and Britain's global power and influence significantly waned. For those who subscribe to the blessing and cursing principle, this swift dissolution of a once dominant empire is seen as a direct consequence of its restrictive policies toward Jewish immigration during their greatest hour of need, essentially cursing them. The rise of the United States and counterarguments. Conversely, the rise of the United States to global superpower status during the 20th century is often viewed as a testament to this very principle. Unlike Spain or Britain, the U.S. became the strongest advocate for the establishment and defense of the State of Israel. This support was evident in early recognition. The U.S. was among the first nations to recognize Israel in 1948. Financial and military aid. Over decades, the U.S. has provided billions of dollars in aid, ensuring Israel's security and technological edge in a hostile region. For example, by 2023, total U.S. aid to Israel was estimated to exceed $150 billion, unadjusted for inflation. Diplomatic support. The U.S. has consistently used its veto power in the UN Security Council to block resolutions deemed detrimental to Israel's interests. These actions are interpreted by proponents of the principle as America's blessing of Israel, which in turn brought forth divine favor and contributed to America's unprecedented prosperity and global leadership. However, it is crucial to acknowledge counterarguments and alternative explanations. Critics argue that attributing complex historical events like the rise and fall of empires or the emergence of superpowers solely to the treatment of a single group oversimplifies history. They point to numerous other contributing factors. Economic forces. Spain's decline can be linked to the price revolution, over-reliance on colonial wealth, and a lack of industrial innovation. Britain's decline was influenced by the costs of two world wars, the rise of nationalism in colonies, and changing global power dynamics. Political and military strategies. The U.S. rise is attributed to its vast natural resources, geographic isolation from major conflicts, industrial capacity, and effective foreign policy strategies, e.g., Marshall Plan, Cold War containment. Internal factors, societal structures, technological advancements, and leadership decisions play significant roles. While these alternative explanations are valid and contribute to a comprehensive understanding of history, proponents of the blessing and cursing principle maintain that the historical correlation is too striking to be dismissed as mere coincidence. For them, it represents an underlying divine pattern that, while not excluding other historical factors, acts as a powerful overarching influence on national destinies. The modern-day watchman, the evangelical Christian community. In the contemporary landscape of U.S.-Israel relations, a powerful and often decisive force is the evangelical Christian community in America. Numbering in the tens of millions, this demographic holds significant political influence and acts as a spiritual and political watchman over U.S. policy toward Israel. The strength and organization of this community are formidable. Evangelicals constitute a substantial voting bloc, particularly within the Republican Party, and their unified voice on issues relating to Israel carries considerable weight with elected officials. Their extensive networks include large churches, media ministries, influential advocacy groups, and grassroots movements. These organizations regularly mobilize their members through educational campaigns, prayer initiatives, and lobbying efforts on Capitol Hill. Key among these groups is Christians United for Israel, CUFI, founded by Pastor John Hagee. CUFI is arguably the largest pro-Israel organization in the United States, boasting millions of members. Pastor Hagee, a prominent figure in evangelicalism, has been a leading voice in advocating for unwavering U.S. support for Israel. CUFI's activities range from organizing massive annual conferences in Washington, D.C., where thousands of evangelicals descend on Congress, to grassroots advocacy, encouraging direct contact with legislators, and promoting pro-Israel legislation. They also engage in extensive educational outreach, publishing materials and hosting events to inform their members about Israel's biblical and strategic importance. The driving force behind this fervent support is a deeply held theological conviction rooted in the Abrahamic covenant's blessing and cursing principle. For millions of evangelicals, supporting Israel is not a foreign policy option but an act of worship and obedience to God. They believe that God's promises to Abraham are eternal and that nations are blessed or cursed based on their treatment of the Jewish people. Therefore, standing with Israel is seen as aligning with God's will and ensuring divine favor for the United States. This goes beyond mere political alliance. It is viewed as a spiritual obligation, a faith-based mandate to protect and uphold the nation of Israel as God's chosen instrument in His unfolding prophetic plan. This conviction provides an unshakable foundation for their activism, making them a uniquely dedicated and influential force in American foreign policy towards Israel. The intricate and often enigmatic relationship between the United States and Israel, seemingly an anomaly in the landscape of international diplomacy, reveals a profound underlying narrative when viewed through the lens of biblical prophecy and theological conviction. This essay has meticulously explored the central argument that this alliance transcends mere geopolitical calculation, rooted instead in a 4,000-year-old story of divine covenant, historical fulfillment, and unfolding end-time prophecies. We began by establishing that the U.S.-Israel connection is not solely a matter of strategic interests or shared democratic values, but is profoundly shaped by a belief in a divine connection that impacts the very destiny of nations. This belief finds its bedrock in the Abrahamic covenant, a unilateral and unconditional promise detailed in Genesis. We dissected its three unshakable pillars. The miraculous emergence and enduring preservation of the Jewish people against all odds, the eternal grant of the land of Israel despite centuries of desolation and dispersion, and the universal principle of blessing and cursing based on how nations treat Abraham's descendants. The unique nature of this covenant, solidified by God's soul walk through the covenant ritual, underscores its binding and eternal validity. The historical trajectory of Israel itself serves as a prophetic tapestry woven through millennia. The ancient prophecies detailing Israel's dispersion and desolation due to disobedience, Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28, were tragically fulfilled over nearly 1,900 years, transforming the land into a barren expanse. Yet, the equally astonishing miraculous return of the Jewish people in 1948, the rapid restoration of the land turning deserts into fertile fields, Isaiah 35 verse 1, and the unprecedented revival of the Hebrew language, Zephaniah 3 verse 9, Ben Yehuda's efforts stand as powerful, modern-day fulfillments of these ancient predictions. As this prophetic tapestry continues to unfold, Israel, particularly Jerusalem, emerges as the epicenter of end-time prophecies. Zechariah 12 verses 2-3 vividly portrays Jerusalem as a cup of reeling and a burdensome stone for all nations, a prediction that resonates powerfully with current geopolitical realities, including endless UN debates, UNESCO controversies, peace negotiation stalemates, and the highly charged U.S. recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. This sets the stage for accelerating prophetic events, most notably the Gog and Magog War, Ezekiel 38-39, a foretold invasion of Israel by a coalition of northern and southern powers, whose modern identifications, Russia, Iran, Turkey, etc., align disturbingly with contemporary alliances. The ultimate climax is Armageddon, Revelation 16 verse 16. Not a conventional world war, but a final, divine confrontation where the nations of the world are supernaturally gathered to fight against Christ himself upon his return to Israel. In this grand narrative, the United States' enduring support for Israel takes on profound significance. From its very inception, America's biblical worldview, shaped by Puritan identification with ancient Israel and the Old Testament influence on its founders, laid a cultural and spiritual groundwork for this alliance. The historical patterns, interpreted by many as manifestations of the blessing and cursing principle, contrasting the decline of empires like Spain and Britain after their negative policies toward Jews with America's rise, further bolster this conviction. Today, the powerful evangelical Christian community acts as a vigilant watchman, advocating for Israel not merely as a foreign policy choice, but as an act of worship and obedience to God, believing that their nation's destiny is inextricably linked to this divine mandate. The core message is clear: the U.S.-Israel relationship is the culmination of a 4,000-year-old historical and theological story. The meaning of U.S. support transcends mere policy. It is an acknowledgement of Israel's unique role as God's prophetic clock for the nations, and a conscious decision to side with what is believed to be God's side in redemptive history. Therefore, we urge readers to consider viewing geopolitical events, particularly those surrounding Israel and U.S. decisions concerning it, through this profound lens. The intricate dance of nations and the unfolding of history may not be random, but rather part of a divinely orchestrated plan. The ultimate and powerful conclusion echoes an ancient promise: the destiny of a nation may very well depend on its adherence to that age-old vow, "I will bless those who bless you."